And joining us now on the line from Washington, D.C., Suhail Khan, a Muslim and a member of the U.S. Republican Party and chairman of the Conservative Inclusion Coalition. Suhail, it's good to have you on the line. How are you tonight?
Doing well. Thank you for having me.
Not at all. I do want to broaden our discussion eventually into the relationship between Muslim Americans and the GOP, but off the top, since it's so much in the news, I think we have to start here. Most Republicans, from what we can glean here in Canada, seem to be opposed to this Muslim community center that will be built near Ground Zero. Most Muslims seem to be in favor of it. You're both. So where do you come down on it?
Well, I'm going to fall on the side of the Constitution. American Muslims, as their fellow Americans, have every right to build places of worship as long as they're in accordance with the local zoning laws, and that has been the case in the case of the community in Lower Manhattan. So I have to say that the community there has not only the right, but really that is something that they should morally continue because we don't want to allow events like 9/11 to divide our country needlessly. And even if there are some, unfortunately, in my party and perhaps in the Democratic Party who are using this issue for partisan gain, I think we shouldn't let those who might use and exploit this issue win in the short term.
Let me get some sense about the feedback you got to the letter that you and some others in your party recently wrote, an open letter to the Republican Party criticizing the way some have responded to the whole Cordoba House controversy. What was the reaction you did get when that letter became public?
The reaction was very positive. From the grassroots level, from people just around the country calling and emailing and sending messages on Facebook saying, right on, we're with you, to national leadership on Capitol Hill and in the states, the response has been extremely positive, where the vast majority of Republicans and conservatives in the country were silent on the issue. And when they heard our letter, read our letter, and heard about our standing up to some of the voices in our party who were standing in opposition to the project, they said, right on, we're with you. And the positive response has really put some wind in our sails to continue pushing for fairness and what's right in this issue.
Having said that, some people may find it odd that you, as a Muslim, would join the Republican Party. They just feel those two don't go together. So tell us why you, in the first place, joined the GOP.
Well, those questions are just recent questions. I joined the GOP over 20 years ago as a college student because I was attracted to the fundamental principles of individual liberty, of limited government, of really giving individuals the ability to make decisions best for themselves, whether those be social or economic issues. And those issues, I think, really come to bear when it comes to this very issue of the Islamic Center in Lower Manhattan. So I still stand strong as a proud conservative and a proud Republican. And, you know, there's a negative reaction, unfortunately, right now to this issue, but I really feel this will be a phase that we'll get through.
And you actually have written about this in Foreign Policy magazine, and I want to read an excerpt of it to share with our viewers. Here's what you said. Muslim Americans are, by and large, both socially and economically conservative. 61% of them would ban abortion except to save the life of the mother. 84% support school choice. Muslims overwhelmingly support traditional marriage. More than a quarter, over twice the national average, are self-employed small business owners, and most support reducing taxes and the abolition of estate tax. By all rights, they should be Republicans. And not long ago they were. American Muslims voted 2-1 for George H.W. Bush in 1992, and while they went for Bill Clinton by the same margin in 1996, they were brought back into the Republican fold in 2000 by George W. Bush. If Clinton was, as the author Toni Morrison once quipped, America's first black president, Bush was, at least momentarily, the country's first Muslim president. Okay, that begs a follow-up. What the heck do you mean by that?
Well, just as I described in that piece, if Toni Morrison was describing Bill Clinton as the first black president because of the fact that Bill Clinton was very comfortable reaching out to African Americans not just as a political constituency, but as indeed a friend and somebody who was very comfortable talking and interacting with African Americans here in the United States. Likewise, George W. Bush as governor and then subsequently as president was the first president who seemed very open to reaching out for American Muslim support, to really understanding the issues that have concerned the American Muslim community, and for that reason I wrote in that piece that he was in fact the first American Muslim president. And that was borne out in the campaign where he visited a mosque in Michigan, the first presidential candidate to do so, and then in the days after 9/11 He bravely went to a mosque here in Washington, D.C. to remind fellow Americans that this was an attack on all Americans, not by members of one particular faith, but rather of a group of terrorists who are hijacked faith for their own murderous ends, but that we as Americans should remain united and not in any way scapegoat any particular religious community here in the United States or around the globe. And for that reason, I stand by the fact that he was our first Muslim president. Of course, I say that somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but also to remind people that the question has been raised, why is there so much anti-Muslim rhetoric swirling around the country on the net, on cable shows now, 9 full years after 9/11? And I would argue because for 8 years we had a president who stood strong against such bigotry.
Well, let me follow up on that, because the Pew Research Center just published some findings which say, and we'll bring this up here for our viewers to see, by more than 2 to 1, 54% to 21%, Republicans express an unfavorable opinion of Islam. The balance of opinion among independents is negative, 40% unfavorable versus 28% favorable. Among Democrats, favorable opinions of Islam outnumber unfavorable ones by 41 to 27%. We had the other day Newt Gingrich comparing, when discussing the community center at Ground Zero, he compared Islam to Nazism. He said you'd no more build a mosque or a Muslim community center near Ground Zero than you would allow Nazis to build something near Auschwitz. I mean, that was, I guess for a lot of people, that was an extremely reprehensible analogy to make. So what has happened to the relationship between your religion and your party?
I think you have three factors here. The first is that, as I already outlined, that we had a leader of our party under George W. Bush who was standing tall and standing strong against such religiously divisive language. We no longer have him in office. Secondly, you have the fact that we're now coming on an election year, and these chatter in the internet that was circulating in 2008 around Barack Obama and his background and his Muslim heritage of his father, that has morphed from 10% on the fringe to now over 20% believing that he is in fact secretly Muslim. So some Republicans, like Newt Gingrich and others, have unfortunately seized upon these rumors and really this unfortunate chatter and brought it into the mainstream discourse of our political conversation. And that, coupled with the fact that we're in a heated election where it's really fighting in the trenches tooth and nail for every vote, unfortunately, some like Sarah Palin, some like Newt Gingrich, have sought to really stoop and use this issue for partisan gain. And I believe, again, it's unfortunate. As I pointed out in the piece, Muslim Americans have time and time again voted for Republicans. They feel more comfortable on the issues with the Republican Party, but they will stay in the Democratic side of the aisle if they keep having and hearing, I should say, important voices from within the Republican ranks pushing them away.
Don't get mad at me for asking this, but we may as well make it official, since there are apparently as many Americans who think that your president is a Muslim as who believe Elvis is still alive. Do you think President Obama is a Muslim?
No, I don't. I don't. I'll take the president on his word that he's a Christian. He made a very powerful statement yesterday in his speech, and he happened to mention that he's a Christian. So I will, while I'm a partisan, and I'll critique President Obama on the issues, I will take him at his word that he is a proud practicing Christian.
And do you know former Speaker Gingrich, and if so, have you confronted him on his views?
I do know him, and we have been in communication, folks in our group, and we're hoping to meet with him and his staff to discuss this issue. But really, it's not about one individual. It's really about, again, the heart and soul of the party. And that response, as I stated earlier, has been overwhelmingly positive, that the leadership from the House, from the Senate, from the RNC, and all the way down to the grassroots level has been increasingly positive from Americans saying, look, we need to stop this. We want to win elections, but we don't want to win it by trying to exploit religiously divisive language or any type of fear that might be bubbling up in the days after 9/11. I'm
going to play a clip now from John McCain in the 2008 election. This was just about a month before Election Day. And, lest anybody think that this is a recent phenomenon because of what's been going on in the lower end of Manhattan, John McCain said something rather odd during the campaign. I'm going to play this clip and then get you to comment on it, okay? Michael, roll tape, please.
Sure.
I got to ask you a question. I do not I can't trust Obama. I have read about him, and he's a he's an Arab. He is not. No?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am. No, ma'am. He's a decent family man, citizen that I just happen to have disagreements with on fundamental issues, and that's what this campaign is all about. He's not. Thank you. Thank you.
Now, Suhail, I don't know if John McCain meant to say that he's a decent family man, therefore he can't be an Arab, but it, you know, for some people came across that way. When you saw that, what did you think?
When I saw that, having worked you know, on the McCain campaign, I knew exactly what the senator was trying to say, and that he was saying, no, Obama is not an Arab, not a Muslim. Of course, the two are often separate, but in this case, they were being conflated. And I think he wasn't trying to say that he's not an Arab and to the exclusion he's, you know, a family man and a good person. I think he meant that he's wanted to say something very positive and wanted to stand up for Barack Obama in that instance. But there were many in the Muslim community who wished that he had said something to the effect of what I call kind of the Seinfeld line, that no, he's not an Arab, not that there's anything wrong if he was. And on the other side, there were also concerns that Barack Obama, when he established a new website called Stop the Smear, because of a lot of these internet rumors that were circulating, he placed on that internet the accusation that he was a Muslim as a smear. And many Muslims were concerned that, you know, that should not be categorized as a smear, because again, while he's not a Muslim, he could say, look, I'm not a Muslim, I'm a proud Christian, but there shouldn't be anything wrong with the fact that if I was, or any other candidate, as a Muslim. And if you recall, it took Colin Powell in a television interview to stand up and say, these questions are not what America's about. You know, we cannot tell young American Muslim kids that they can't someday grow up to be president. That's not America.
Okay, in our last few minutes here, let's broaden our discussion even further and talk about whose responsibility it is to, if this is the right word, restore the image of Islam, the image of the average Muslim American in your country. Does it come from within your community? Does it come from without the, I mean, help us out, help us understand this.
Yeah. No, you've raised a very good point, and that is this controversy surrounding the community center in Lower Manhattan has really underscored the need for the American Muslim community, 68 million strong, 6 to 8 million strong, I should state, to really redouble their efforts to really tell our story about who we are. You know, one of the things, for example, I've been hearing from some politicians, both Republican and Democrat, is that, oh, it's not sensitive for Muslim Americans to build a community center blocks away from ground zero, that somehow it's an insult to the family of the victims of 9/11. And I have to remind my fellow Americans that Muslims were victims on 9/11 too. Hundreds of Muslims died in the towers. There were Muslim first responders in the fire department, the police department that went bravely to save their fellow Americans. And indeed, Muslims have been part of the American fabric, first invisibly, and then as a curiosity, and unfortunately now as a perceived threat. But we've been here as professionals, as business owners, as doctors and lawyers, and perhaps now we have to do a better job of telling our story. We've been focused on our own lives, like all Americans, and living our lives, educating our children, putting food on the table. But now we really have to make an extra effort to reach out and educate our fellow Americans that, yes, we're Americans, we love our country, we love the Constitution, we're just like you, and that we're not some newly immigrant group that just arrived on the shores that somehow might be threatening the very fabric of our life.
And in our last 30 seconds here, are you concerned that Islamophobia in your country has moved from the fringes into the mainstream?
I think it has briefly moved into the mainstream, and I think that with strong leadership from, again, from people, everyday people on the street to people in high public office, I think we'll overcome this. Other communities, Catholics, Jewish Americans, Italians, Irish, have went through the same persecution. Unfortunately, we're going through that now as Muslim Americans, but I have confidence in the American people and the American way of life that will come out this and be just as much a part of the fabric of American society as everybody else.
Suhail Khan, it's awfully good of you to join us on TVO tonight. Thanks so much.
Thank you.